Hey guys, tonight we're gonna feel the icy bite of the medieval wind on your exposed skin as the sun sets long before you're ready to fend off the cold. Because let's face it, you don't have a thermal jacket or an automatic fireplace. The scene opens on a small village of stone and clay, where makeshift chimneys belch smoke and the orange light of dusk fades faster than you can light your wooden torch. You notice the first sign. The air thickens, steam rises with every breath, and that feeling of icy needles begins to seep through the thick fabric of your tunic. You probably wouldn't survive this without learning a few tricks, but that's okay. It's just a bedtime story. So before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And be sure to comment on where you're listening to this from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background sound, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You scan the horizon. The sun, once high and commanding, now disappears behind hills that are turning purple. In moments, the sky is transformed into a poster of late autumn. Clear skies, wispy clouds, and that outrageous promise that it will get even colder. Historically speaking, the so-called Little Ice Age peaked between the 14th and 19th centuries, causing harsh winters that destroyed crops and forced farmers to rethink everything from planning to ways to warm their feet. You feel the wind licking the stone walls of your house. Every crack becomes a funnel for the cold, and the clay between the bricks groans with the thermal shock. The village moves like a disturbed anthill. Someone rushes to adjust the leather door latch. Another steps on twigs to light an extra ember in the communal fireplace. And the dogs, those lucky four-legged creatures, pile on the piles of straw in the corner of the hut, snoring as if they were in a medieval spa. Bizarre trivia of the night. In some regions, peasants would tie the skins of young animals over the interior walls to create a kind of primitive insulation. The fur and skin would absorb the hot vapor, reducing the feeling of biting wind, a method reminiscent of a patchwork quilt, but much less comfortable than a modern comforter. You walk inside the house, where a family has spread dry straw on the floor. The makeshift bed is a pile of clean hay, if you're lucky. Usually, the hay has already been used for the animals, and only the dampest stuff is left. You try to rearrange the woolen rag that serves as the bed. Covered, but the heavy fabric feels more like a sack of frozen potatoes than anything intuitively cozy. The opposite wall is where the communal fireplace is. A brazier in an iron bowl, surrounded by stones, where every piece of wood you use becomes currency. You add 2 twigs, and the embers release a flickering flame. The heat only reaches your chest and hands. Your feet remain a tomb of ice. You try placing your damn shoes near the embers. A great idea, until the soul melts and you smell ancient burning rubber. Historians still debate whether the use of braziers inside homes was predominant among peasants or whether it was more common in urban villages. Some argue that the risk of fire was too high, forcing most to resign themselves to the nighttime cold, while others point to records of entire villages keeping portable iron stoves burning almost nonstop. In the corner, you prepare your warm-up kit, a bowl of hot porridge, a handful of oatmeal, and sour milk that warms your abdomen, while the frigid air makes you wonder if the next meal will be soup or more soup. And the soup was also half-slush soup. Nothing fancy, but it works as a caloric fuel. The simpler it is, the more effective it is at keeping your body working in furnace mode. You put on another layer, tunic, lined cloak, tiny hood, and still feel the back of your neck crying from the cold. A medieval joke here. Wearing all this, you can barely lift your arms, but at least you won't freeze to death standing up. Warm sarcasm. And speaking of layering, there is some scholarly debate about how much layering peasants could actually do without losing the mobility needed to gather firewood or keep an eye on livestock. Some documents describe layers as high as 3 cloaks of wool, but others say that this was the preserve of those with enough stock and status to donate wool to the church. You realize you're not alone in this thermal contest. Neighbors show up, each dragging a dry wooden chair to the fireplace. They exchange sharp jokes about who snores the loudest and who brought almost warm wine. The laughter echoes, a conspiracy against the cold. Light joke number 2, go to bed without a hot breakfast the next day was true medieval torture. Meanwhile, the wind blows against the loose tiles of the roof, making a sound like a last sigh. Your eyes are fixed on the orange ember, hypnotically flickering. You remember a more obscure debate. whether the fireplace should be in the center of the house to maximize heat or on the side to protect the walls. The debate still divides academics. Finally, you settle into the hay, roll up your cloak like a makeshift sarcophagus, and feel the first ecstasy of warmth in your chest. The creaking wooden mosaic around you becomes a soundtrack of forced calm. You close your eyes and, for a brief moment, forget the fire that could set everything ablaze and the wind that wants to freeze you alive. You take a deep breath and realize, even without a baby comforter or electric heater, these first hours of darkness hold lessons in survival. About how every inch of fabric, every spark, and every laugh helps sustain life and sanity. You wake up with the cold scraping your skin as if it were coming from deep within the rocks. It's time to figure out where, exactly, to sleep without turning into a human popsicle. Your house, if we can call that narrow space a home, has 2 or 3 rough stone walls, a poorly fitted thatched roof, and a dirt floor. There's no insulation. Every crack in the wall is an invitation for the wind to come in and freeze everything that dares to exist. The iron pots, the ceramic jars, and of course you. You stand up slowly, wrapped in the same heavy woolen cloak you've worn all day. He brushes away a few fleas that have taken advantage of his body heat during the night. Then he heads to his bed, a low platform of planks covered with a mat of dried straw and a rough blanket that has been woven and patched so many times that it has lost its softness, even in memory. If he's lucky, he'll find some extra straw packed into the sides as a makeshift pillow. Luck, of course, is not the peasant's strong point. You push the blanket back to rearrange it, try to fill the gaps between the straw and the cold walls. The platform creaks under your weight, letting out a sigh of ancient wood. You adjust the straw mat to avoid any annoying holes, then press your back against the warmer side, which has been recently touched by the sun. But the heat lasts for seconds before it runs down the boards like water in an open gutter. Historically speaking, medieval peasant dwellings in rural Europe usually consisted of just one room, where people cooked, ate, worked, and slept, a true multipurpose apartment of the 12th century. The fire was kept in the center for warmth, but it also posed a constant danger. Uncontrolled flames could consume the entire building in minutes. You can imagine what it would be like to be lucky enough to sleep in a barn. After all, that giant pile of hay, although infested with rodents and dust, retains heat better than your miserable mat. Some farming families would store sacks of grain near their beds to create thermal mass. The heat escaping from the body at night will be partially absorbed by the grain, reducing the sensation of freezing. A side note, in some alpine regions, farmers would place heated stones on the stove's embers and wrap them in cloth before burying them under the hay, creating a pillow that would release heat for up to 3 hours. But of course, you're not in an alpine chalet. Your thatched roof can't support rocks in the bedroom. The chances of a fire are like a vampire at a gala convention. So you do what you can. Fill the cracks in the wall with straw, wedge the wooden door with a log, and then you're ready to go. Crosswise and wraps a thick cloth around the window's iron frame to block drafts. All this with the skill of someone who was born accustomed to improvising. You even have one more trick, bringing your chickens indoors. Yes, believe it or not, during the coldest nights, it was common for families to bring their chickens into the main room. The warm bodies of the birds, packed together, create a microclimate that can raise the local temperature by a few degrees, enough to prevent frostbite on your fingers. Yes, you fall asleep surrounded by clucking and feathers, but at least the back of your body won't be completely numb by dawn. Historians still debate whether this custom was widespread among peasants or whether it was restricted to more isolated communities subject to heavy snowfall. You look at the corner of the house, a dark corner where you have released dozens of sparks from the improvised brazier. That pile of ash, the result of medium-sized wood and dried branches, heats the floor for hours. Your strategy is simple. Line up loose planks next to the brazier, creating a kind of heat mat that extends the reach of the fire. You place your bare feet there, feel the heat rising through your soles, and remain still long enough to freeze the rest of your body afterwards. It's the famous nocturnal heat and freeze. However, this practice comes at a price. With the concentrated heat, the air becomes dry and humidity drops. In the morning, your throat is dry, your skin crackles, and every speck of dust feels like an icy dagger. Some people solve this problem by hanging containers of water from the ceiling to slowly evaporate and maintain the humidity inside. This technique is similar to a primitive humidifier, but requires constant refills of cold water. You return to your bed and put on another layer, a thick tunic, a padded wool vest, a wide belt to keep the heat in your torso, and a pair of lined pants, if you have any, that is. Then you put on homemade wool socks and, finally, boots lined with animal skins. Each layer provides warmth, but it reduces your mobility to something like a newborn T-Rex. Still, walking around in the freezing cold is not an option. You stagger to the fireplace for a last sip of hot porridge before settling in. A tallow oil lamp flickers beside you, casting flickering shadows. You move your bed as close as possible, but without letting the blanket reach the fire, otherwise it will turn to fuel. Turning on a lamp presents a dilemma. Light means heat, but also tallow costs. The longer you sail, the faster you run out of fuel, and like any medieval bargain, tallow is very expensive for potato growers. The final curiosity. In some villages in northern Europe, there is a tradition of gathering neighbors for chopping nights. Each family would donate extra wood and, in return, be allowed to sleep a little closer to the communal fireplace. This system of social cooperation ensured that no one would freeze completely, but it required shifts of guards to watch the fire and prevent firewood theft. This network of solidarity proves that, even in the fiercest cold, collective safety was vital. You get comfortable, turn off the lamp, because too much light can also cause problems like attracting insects and signaling your home to burglars, and pull the blanket up to your chin. Your body no longer feels as cold. The balance of straw, firewood, chickens, and layers of wool has created a barely tolerable microclimate. Your eyes feel heavy. The gaps only seem like the distant sound of wind and drips of melting ice. As you close your eyes, you reflect. Surviving the cold night is not just a matter of shelter, but of collective ingenuity, improvisation, and above all, being willing to sleep surrounded by anything that provides warmth, even chickens and bump boots. You lean against the cold wall for a second, smelling the dry straw mixed with the ochre smoke, reminding you that in order to survive, you must dress and cover every inch of your body. Layers, straw, and the smell of smoke. This is your new nighttime uniform. You wear a linen shirt, rough as rope, beneath a thick wool tunic. It's itchy, but it doesn't matter. Any barrier against the wind is worth the discomfort. Over the tunic is a quilted vest woven from the wool of local sheep. And finally, the thickest cloak you can find, dyed a brown so dark that it nearly swallows the dim light of the tallow lamp. As you adjust your sleeves, you are reminded of a historical fact. In medieval Europe, especially in the 12th and 13th centuries, wrapping oneself in multiple layers was common not only for warmth, but also to protect oneself from insect bites and from the sick during times of plague. Each layer serves a purpose: insulation, sweat absorption, or simply a barrier against predators, critters, and noisy neighbors. You cut an extra piece of straw to tuck between your vest and tunic, creating a makeshift mattress that traps body heat. The straw, dry and faintly scented with the scent of grain, mingles with the pungent smell of smoke wafting from the central fireplace. The moisture from your hot sweat and the chilly air meets the straw, producing a whisper of creaking sounds, somehow keeping your thoughts company. Straw isn't just padding. Here's a side note. In some northern regions, peasants center their beds with dried herbs, thyme, rosemary, nettle twigs to repel insects, and, in the process, purify their sleep with scents that supposedly warded off evil spirits. You put a handful of thyme under your vest, wondering if it will actually keep flies away more than the strong smell of damp wool. As you approach the fireplace, each layer restricts your movement, and you feel like a newly swaddled baby, protected but completely at the mercy of your swaddler. The wood heats slowly. You feel the heat spread through the vest and into your body, but the upper mantle still blocks the hot air, creating a small personal chamber of heated air. The smoke, in turn, escapes through a pipe improvised when it works or accumulates on the ceiling, forcing you to sneeze every now and then. Historians still debate whether layering techniques were the result of cultural tradition or pure economic necessity. Some documents suggest that layering arose as an improvisation by poor peasants who used whatever they had, while others argue that there was detailed empirical knowledge about which fabrics best protected against extreme cold. You wonder which group you fit into: medieval scientists testing layers, or just people wearing whatever they could to avoid turning into a block of ice. To complete the ritual, you place a woolen cap on top of your head. It is said that 30% of your body heat is lost through your head, and wrap a thick linen scarf around your neck. Each fold of the scarf tightens your throat, but keeps you alive. You feel the warm fabric against your skin and imagine that this tightness is history itself pulsing. Generations of peasants doing the same thing, night after night. You take a staggering step toward the corner of the room where the straw has formed a makeshift nest. Each blade of straw scrapes against your tunic as you shift. It's the sound of medieval security. You wrap your cloak around yourself and tuck the edges under the straw mat, creating a double barrier. The sound of creaking wood echoes as you shift, and your eyes fall on the small flame dancing in the grate. The smell of smoke invades your nostrils, mixing notes of burnt wood, damp wool, and dry straw. A mixture that reminds you of tattered leather and over-toasted bread. You take a deep breath, letting the aroma lull you. The smoke, in small quantities, even has a relaxing effect, almost like impure incense. Maybe it's just your lazy mind projecting comfort where there is none. You look up at the ceiling. Hanging leather strips used to block gaps swing slowly, casting dancing shadows. It's a hypnotic spectacle, a rudiment of medieval cinema. You almost forget about the cold for a moment. Finally, you check your white belt, where you've hung a small bag of aromatic herbs that a local priest has blessed, a practice that combines faith and pragmatism. Whether the belief works is anyone's guess, but the bag's woody scent feels protective, and, at worst, it masks the smell of the corn husk cigar you smoke to stay awake during the watch. You lie down, the multiple layers squeezing every part of your body, but ensuring that, at least until the early hours of the morning, you won't feel the cold cutting into every inch of your flesh. The heat trapped in the straw, the sweat trapped in your clothes, and the watchful smoke all work together to keep you warm. The last thing you see before you close your eyes is the flickering reflection of the flame on the metal of the tallow lantern, a reminder that even in the midst of so much improvisation, there is ingenuity. And then you surrender to sleep, protected by fabrics, straw, smoke, and ancient traditions. You wake up to the dull crack of a log bursting into live embers, followed by a faint crackling that makes the house sound like a heart beating in the darkness. Firewood, embers, and the constant risk of fire are inseparable companions of medieval nights. Without the heat of these flickering flames, you become a statue of ice, but with them, you risk seeing your house turn to ashes in minutes. When you open your eyes, you notice the environment around you lit by the orange dance of the brazier inside an old iron container. The famous portable brazier, or brazier, brought by the Moors to Iberia in the early 13th century and adopted in several European villages for its practicality of heating without a chimney. The container is surrounded by stones that retain heat and help to keep the floor in a pleasant, or almost, thermal support. On the other side, a pile of branches and logs waits patiently to be consumed. You sit up slowly, careful not to disturb the straw beneath you too much. The heat invades your chest first, rising up your spine, reminding you that every crack in that container could be the origin of a tragedy. Flames that escape, sparks that land on the dry straw, and a moment of carelessness that consumes everything around. Firewood is a highly valuable currency, especially in the harsh winters when trees became the target of disputes. There are cases in which neighbors would even steal logs from each other's forest, causing tensions that sometimes resulted in open fights. Historically, records indicate that the vast majority of rural dwellings had only one fixed fire point, a hearth dug into the ground or a brazier in a clay bowl, and that firewood consumption was so high that entire communities had to manage common areas of reforestation to keep warm during the cold months. Firewood compensated for the lack of adequate clothing and makeshift beds, but required constant vigilance. You pick a thicker branch from the pile and insert it into the brazier, watching the flames playfully jump with sparks before settling into a quiet ember. The log burns from the outside in, and soon you can place the tip in the makeshift chimney, a hole in the roof sealed with clay and planks, to ensure that most of the smoke is expelled. But this is imperfect. On windy nights, the smoke returns, gnawing at your eyes with a subtle sting. You rub it a little, remembering that in the 15th century, people wore a kind of rudimentary mask made of wool soaked in vinegar to protect their faces from the sun, a curious and somewhat disturbing marginal fact. As he adjusts his makeshift mask, a linen scarf around his nose, he thinks about the everyday risk. Every spark raises an invitation to disaster. Historians still debate whether peasant communities carried out specific nightly patrols to reflect checking the braziers, or whether they simply trusted in the torches and promises of divine protection. Some accounts describe family groups taking turns sitting by the fire, while others indicate that many simply slept and woke only at the slightest smell of burning. You stand up carefully and walk to the edge of the fire pit, reaching out to feel the heat rising in waves. Every inch closer invites complacency. Every inch further away invites freezing. You scoop some embers into an iron bucket, wearing thick leather gloves, an indispensable weapon for anyone who wants to move embers without painful burns. And in those calloused hands comes the sense of responsibility. It's not just about keeping the fire going, it's about keeping it under control. Just behind you, a bed of dry straw waits, and you gather a small pile of embers to place beneath it, creating a makeshift pillow, an effective method of keeping your head and torso warm, but one that required care to avoid turning your sleep into smoldering ashes. Interestingly, in some German villages, peasants would mix moist herbs with the embers, reducing the risk of spontaneous combustion and releasing a pleasant aroma with each movement of the straw, a ploy that was as ingenious as it was dangerous. You arrange the embers and examine the main container. The stones surrounding it show cracks and black stains, remnants of previous winters and small-scale fires that could have consumed the entire property if left unchecked. A sigh rises. Behind the comforting glow of the flame lies the memory of stories of families who lost everything in the night, awakened only when the flames leaped across the strip of clay that separated the fireplace from the wall. Taking a deep breath, you pick up another thin twig to feed the fire when it threatens to die. You plan your bedtime, feed, settle, then retreat to the mix of straw, chickens, and layers of clothing. The nighttime cycle repeats itself, as vital as breathing. You consider whether it would be better to sleep for just a few hours and return to the fire when the first signs of cooling appear, or to endure the temperature dropping until only the embers maintain a core of heat, a decision that, according to scholars, varied according to the proximity of social communion. More collaborative villages took turns keeping watch, while isolated regions left each family to its own devices. Finally, you straighten the last log, make sure the iron shovel is beside the bed, and return to the straw bed. You sit up, darkness enveloping your eyes and residual heat on your back. Every spark that flies away from the brazier is a reminder that at any moment, a single spark can bring about the worst. But for now, the warmth is comfortable enough to drive away the cold and give you the sense that even in the Middle Ages, the simple ingenuity of a well-stocked fire could mean the difference between life and death. You lie down, feeling the heat on your back and the smell of burning within your lungs. The sound of crackling echoes in your ears like a sharp-edged lullaby. And as your eyes close, you know, the embers will burn in your sleep too, keeping alive the ritual of risk and survival that defines medieval nights. You wake up with the uncomfortable sensation of dry wool brushing against your skin until it gives you goosebumps, as if you're being brushed by a hawthorn branch. Medieval winter, clothing hated comfort, and the best you could do was to wear several layers of thick fabric that together weighed more than a sack of potatoes. Your evening wardrobe is a spectacle of layers. Linen shirt, rough wool tunic, quilted gambeson, thick cloak, and, if you're lucky, a fur-lined fur coat. Each piece serves a purpose, but none of them flirts with the idea of softness. You sit on a straw bed and try to adjust the sleeves of your gambeson, but find that the vegetable fiber filling pushes your body out of the tunic. The gambeson, originally worn under armor, was incorporated into peasant clothing because it offered an extra barrier against gusts of wind and insect bites. Historically, this quilted lining is known to have emerged between the 13th and 14th centuries to protect soldiers, but it was quickly adopted by less fortunate civilians when heavy snows began to threaten crops and firewood became scarce. Fun fact, in some alpine regions, some peasants sewed small pockets into their coats to store heated stones, sometimes called sleet stones, which once carried over the fire, would release heat for hours, turning your jacket into a mini furnace. You experienced this yourself yesterday, when a bag of pebbles packed in your crotch kept you alive until first light. As you adjust the collar of your linen tunic, you feel the weight of the layers pulling down on your shoulders. Every fold of fabric repeats the same theme: survive the cold, sacrifice mobility. You remember your wool tunic, dark brown, made of coarse, rarely dyed yarns that creak like armor with each deep breath. Wool, though insulating, retains moisture. When a vapor from your body condenses, the tunic feels as heavy as if you were carrying a bucket of water, and you have no bucket of water to empty. You leap to your feet, staggering, and walk over to the fireplace. It's time to get the fire going again before you get lost in a tangle of layers. Each jacket you pull off reveals another: a goatskin vest, a thinner wool vest underneath, a tan leather vest on top, a veritable sandwich of garments. Disrupting this stacking is an invitation to freeze before you know it. So you simply build up the fire while keeping the thicker jacket on top. Try to preserve the body heat trapped there. Historically, the use of whole skins, foxes, hares, even wolves in some remote areas, was restricted to the nobility because of their high cost and the ecclesiastical prohibition against using animals considered noble. Peasants resorted to patchwork, irregularly sewn pieces of skin, often used as lining around the torso and shoulders, avoiding elaborate cuts and cuts that required careful finishing. You try to swing your arms to test your freedom of movement. It feels like you stepped into a doll's suit. Each step makes the wool and leather creak, producing a sound like ancient wood. And despite all this wrapping, your belly is still exposed when you bend over to lace up your lined boots. The boots, made of thick leather and lined with horsehair or sheepskin, are perfect for insulating moisture, but once damp, they become heavy, cold, and unbearable. And here's where the academic debate comes in. Historians still debate whether these improvised outerwear pieces were the product of detailed empirical knowledge about thermal insulation, or whether they were simply a haphazard mix of whatever was at hand. Some argue that rural communities developed recipes for clothing based on generations of experimentation, a quasi-scientific folk wisdom, while others argue that much of the clothing was the product of economic necessity, with little thought given to its effectiveness beyond the instinct to wear what was available. You take a deep breath, feeling the air condense inside your quilted vest. Each layer attracts oxygen and retains heat, but the humidity is relentless. That's why, on freezing nights, leather cuts or cloaks were hung on the doorstep, not for decoration, but to absorb the steam. You've hung a wet woolen blanket there yourself, turning it into a giant sponge that squishes into droplets as soon as someone opens the door. You adjust a fur hood, covering the exposed nape of your neck. Of course, your head couldn't be left out. Losing heat through your head was as common as losing a good night's sleep. The hood, lined with fur and wool, tightens your face but keeps the biting wind away from your ears. And if, by some carelessness, the edge of the hood releases strands of wool, they form a pile that prevents the geometry of the cold from finding a scale to invade. Meanwhile, you feel a slight chill on your calf. The pants, made of thick fabric and lined with wool felt, are supposed to keep your legs warm, but the moisture rising from the translucent soil seeps in, and the felt acts like a sponge, retaining water and reducing its effectiveness. You remember witnessing neighbors cutting open the bottoms of their pants to create openings to allow air to circulate, a sacrilege to their original purpose, but a ploy against mold and excessive humidity. The night progresses, and you notice that the layers, despite being oppressive, create a kind of protective cocoon. Each piece insulates you from the icy circles that form around the fireplace. You then learn that enduring discomfort was part of the game. Less comfort meant less chance of turning into a walking block of ice. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the thick cloak tighten around your chest, but keeping your torso warm. Before going to bed, you put on a last layer. The outermost layer, waterproof with wax or animal fat, which repels moisture. It's the piece you avoid wearing indoors, but when you put it on, it makes your whole body feel like it's covered in an oily shield. This layer makes a sound like leather being worn and reminds you of the need to find a balance between staying dry and not getting too dry. You slide into the straw jacket, feeling the rough fabric scratch at every fold of your layers. It's uncomfortable, irritating, and yet comforting, a medieval paradox that only those who have faced extreme cold understand. As you settle in, you notice the accumulated weight of the garments. Together, they must weigh more than 10 kilos. But the weight, in a way, is good. It keeps you rooted, preventing the strong wind from moving you and knocking you over. And so, dressed like a walking patchwork army, you close your eyes. The discomfort of your clothes melts away into fatigue, and for a moment you barely feel the fabric creaking as you move. Every fiber, every patch, and every drop of sweat trapped in the fibers works to create internal heat, a sweaty, heavy, and stored heat. Do you think that after donning layers of clothing, stoking the fire, and surrounding your straw bed with warm chickens, you can finally sleep in peace? Think again. In the Middle Ages, the body may have rested, but vigilance never took a vacation. Your sleep is divided into shifts of improvised guard duty, one eye closed, the other half open, ready to react to the slightest sign of danger or too much silence. The first hour passes with soft moans beside you. One neighbor mumbles in his sleep, another shifts position with the crack of bones. Each noise seems amplified by the darkness. You lie on your side, resting your head on the straw pillow lined with warm embers beneath, but you cannot fully relax. The dew trapped inside you throbs, reminding you that life in this world of stone and ice demands constant attention. Historians still debate whether peasants actually kept rigid sleep shifts or whether waking up multiple times was a natural effect of the lack of artificial lighting. Rural chronicle records mention first sleep and second sleep, a period of vigil in the middle of the night for prayers, urgent tasks, or even chatting with neighbors by the fireside, but the practice varied according to the season and the pressure of cold. You open your eyes when a cold breeze blows through the gap next to you. It's a sign that a board has come loose from the wall. You don't ignore it. You lift your trunk, check your mantle, and push the board back in with a thick leather glove. Each gap seals out some of the wind, but it would also cost hours of extra straw. Still, you prefer the effort than risking the cold breaking through. A 10-minute nap, if that, is all you manage. The jingle of a door chain echoes down the hall. Maybe it's a firewood thief looking for leftover branches. Maybe it's a relative who forgot to close the barn door. You rise, slide out of bed, and clumsy in the layers stagger to the brazier. A small stone fence traps enough heat to keep your hands warm as you check the floorboards for scratch marks that might indicate hungry rats. Marginal curiosity. In villages subject to frequent animal invasions, some peasants kept rope nets attached to the ceiling, improvised traps to capture rodents, which once activated hung a few centimeters from the ground, warning with creaking sounds anyone who dared to cross them in the dark. It is a medieval movement alarm without the need for electricity. Be extra alert. Absolute silence, unlike constant noise, often hides dangers. You feel the weight of a second sleep coming on, but the cold of the room pulls you back to responsibility. Modern science may call this fragmented sleep, but for you, it is a survival instinct. Tired body, alert mind. The breeze rustles outside, and you recall the advice of an old neighbor. Never plan to sleep all night. Wake up, pray, move around a bit, and keep your blood circulating. She swore that divided sleep protected against nightmares and nighttime attacks by thieves or predatory animals. Nightmares were seen as traps from the afterlife, and keeping watch was part of spiritual hygiene. You reach out with a restrained movement and caress the cold handle of the iron shovel, which is next to the bed. It is a reminder that, in the event of a spark, you can intervene quickly. But it is also an improvised weapon in case someone, human or beast, invades. This handful of metal and wood is worth as much as a nighttime prayer, as historically recorded by priests and local chronicles, pointing out that self-defense was exercised by the same tool that tended the fire. As you catch your breath, you notice the sound of soft footsteps on the floorboards upstairs. Living quarters or a feasting hall? Hard to tell. Perhaps it is a servant guarding the ale supply, carefully stored near the hearth to keep it from freezing solid. The alcohol supply was valuable. Weak ale or mead, both considered safer than water and an extra source of internal heat if consumed in moderation. Sarcastic humor emerges. Sleeping in this village is almost like participating in an eternal night patrol. Light joke number 3. But it's not just humor. Every waking minute is a chance to prevent catastrophes. Imagine what a human alarm would be like, with each body being an intruder sensor. The entire village worked as a collective organism, taking turns without waking everyone up at the same time, to avoid flashing lanterns and more tickets that were being thrown on the fire. You sit down, grab the remaining porridge from the warming kit, and sip the hot liquid. It's a short sip that warms your esophagus like a warning. Drinking will warm you up but slow you down. You drink, put the pot away, and settle in for a few more minutes of vigilance. Each sip makes you more likely to doze off, but warmer, a medieval dilemma worthy of academic debate. Is nighttime porridge consumption a nutritious strategy or an invitation to sleep at the worst possible time? Historians still ponder the ideal balance between wakefulness and nocturnal eating. Then you get up with a thought of lipstick on your bones. You look at the tallow lamp. It still has fuel for another half hour. Deciding whether to burn the last drop or save it for dawn is like choosing between immediate warmth and future visual clarity. You turn off the lamp, plunging the room into near total darkness. Your eyes, now adapted, perceive the outline of a lie. The straw, the brazier, the icy walls. Silence takes center stage again. The next vigil will be brief. You return to bed, adjust your straw pillow, and lay down your weary body, knowing that dozing is inevitable. At first, a light sleep, ready to be interrupted at the slightest creak. Then something deeper, but never uninterrupted, until the rooster's crow announces the end of the shift. And even when the first signs of dawn appear, you will be prepared, dressed in layers, protected by fire, and ready to face another day of work. As you close your eyes for the third time, you whisper to yourself, sleeping like this is not just resting, it is staying alert until sunrise. Then your body surrenders to fragmented sleep, with one foot in each world, that of uncertain dreams and that of eternal wakefulness. You feel warm all over, but you soon realize that the heat isn't just coming from the fire lances and layers of wool. It's coming from people. Sleeping in one blanket, 5 people, is the norm when the cold threatens to be more deadly than hunger. You wake in the middle of the night, alert, not to noises, but to the proximity of the huddled bodies around you. An arm crosses your chest. A neighbor's legs tangle with yours. You breathe in the warm smell of furs, breath, and burning wood. In the darkness, every inch of fabric counts. The thick blanket, woven by your grandmother's wrinkled hands, is passed from family to family as snow covers the ground. It covers 5 bodies, but miraculously, they all fit. The collective warmth transforms the cloth into a crowded train station where no one wants to leave. The goal is not sentimental coziness, but practical survival. Historically, records from Scandinavian villages describe entire families huddled under shared blankets to endure winters of 2 meters of snow. Every breath and every heartbeat contributed to keeping the textile alive with warmth. You feel your son's body pressing against your side. His weight brings immediate warmth, but prevents you from turning over. If you try to adjust, you bump into your wife's leg, who dreams of firewood. Newly cut. It is a ballet of involuntary collisions, a nocturnal ritual of forced coexistence. With each movement, the blanket creaks slightly, groaning like a beast of burden, reminding us that a single tear here could expose everyone to the cold outside. As you keep your breathing steady, you recall the custom of positioning your heads in opposite directions, covering one person's neck with the other's foot, creating a body mosaic that maximized warmth but required total trust between the sleepers. Trusting 5 people to hold your body still was a test of solidarity. Move as little as possible while still breathing deeply. Fun fact, in some parts of Eastern Europe, people used to make individual straw bags filled with herbs heated inside pottery fragments. Each person had their own, tucked under the communal blanket to provide extra warmth for their feet, a sort of medieval version of an electric blanket. You feel your bag rest against your ankle, releasing a moist warmth that contrasts with the icy fabrics of the outer layers. But there are risks. Body moisture combined with hot steam creates dampness beneath the fabric, which can cause sudden chills when the mass heats up and the insulation ceases. So some peasants would quickly dry their blankets on wooden stakes in the morning, turning them over so that they would dry on both sides before another day of work began. You've been part of that damp dawn, shaking the cloth as if you were chasing ghosts from under your bed. You squint and try to imagine the cold outside, but the human warmth is so intense that it seems to protect not just the body, but the soul. Each mingled sigh creates a rhythm of safety. If one wakes up, everyone wakes up, activating a symphony of collective vigilance. No one sleeps too soundly. Everyone knows that shared comfort can be shattered by one wrong sigh. Academic debate rages over how this extreme intimacy not only prevented hypothermia, but also strengthened community bonds, creating a culture of mutual defense, where keeping your blanket intact was as important as tending to the fire. You feel the weight of these traditions on your shoulders and in your muscles as you try to find a position that won't damage anyone's warmth. Deep down, you understand. On nights like these, the blanket is not just a thick cloth. It is a survival pact. It is the village itself lying together, breathing as one body under a sky that would make the thermometer break if it existed. It is the warmth that cannot be bought at the market, but that is built with each turn of the body, with each secret sigh, and with each moment of comfortable silence. When the cold seems to want to pierce the collective fabric, you pull the blanket a little closer, bringing your face closer to the shared warmth. And, for a moment, you forget that you are awake, not because you slept deeply, but because you allowed yourself to trust. And so, between bodies and human warmth, you rest enough to wake up alive. You wake up with your stomach murmuring silent complaints, so low they sound like a whisper of wind between the tiles. It's time to turn to broths, porridges, and almost hot drinks, the veritable liquid survival arsenal of the medieval peasant. You slowly lift your torso, feeling the straw crust press against your back, and walk over to the only remaining source of heat, a cauldron hanging over the still smoldering brazier. You taste the porridge, a thick gruel made from barley or oats, cooked in salted water, and, if you're lucky, a little sour milk. The taste is plain. It's not confectionery. It's fuel. But the warmth that rises in your esophagus and spreads through your chest is worth it. Historically, it is known that barley was the most accessible grain to the lower classes in medieval Europe, as it better resisted the cold and frost that decimated wheat and rye. As you chew slowly, remembering every cold spell you've ever endured, a neighbor civilizes a clay pot, root and herb soup. You lift the pot to your lips and smell the earthy aroma of turnips, rustic carrots, and a handful of sun-dried parsley. The texture is watery, almost watery, but it works to trick your body into working. Active digestion generates internal heat. You sigh. The soup may taste like dirty water, but today it's your elixir of warmth. Fun fact, in some coastal areas, peasants would add small amounts of dried fish, dried to the point where it tasted like pebbles, to their soup to replenish salt and protein. The problem was that the hardened fish required so much chewing effort that many preferred to give up the protein in exchange for stale bread and an extra sip of beer. You leave the clay pot on a hot rock to maintain the temperature and return to the larger cauldron, where they prepare water with boiled barley. Yes, the morning beer. It is a cloudy drink with a low alcohol content of 1 to 2%, but it warms better than pure water. As you drink it, you feel a slight sweetness in the back of your throat, the result of the barley releasing sugars during the boil. It is liquid food, medicine, and energy fuel. Academic debate. Historians argue whether this early morning practice of drinking beer was primarily a strategy against the lack of fresh water, since boiling the barley killed bacteria, or whether it also carried a cultural component of daily celebration, connecting you to community traditions of sharing steaming mugs at dawn. You pick up a pewter mug, but hesitate when you remember the metallic taste that such dishes often lend to hot drinks. You take a sip anyway. The liquid goes down warm and, for a moment, erases any trace of cold in your body. You feel warm, a heavy warmth, like a liquid blanket filling your arteries. As you watch the steam dissipate, you think of the nettle tea a healer offered the other day. Dried nettles, boiled with a handful of thin honey, produced a dark green liquid that burns slightly on the tongue. It was recommended for cleansing the blood and warding off fevers. You still can't decide whether this is a cure or divine punishment, but you admit that the herbaceous flavor distracts from the miserable cold inside. You take a piece of hard bread and dip it into the barley broth, watching as it absorbs the liquid and becomes pliable. It's the only way to eat bread that doesn't challenge the integrity of your teeth. The soft gruel and the bitter broth work together to make lunch and dinner a seamless experience. In the corner, A neighbor improvises a wooden mug with a hole plug with a piece of hardened pitch. He twists the cap and pours a mouthful of fin mead, a fermented nectar of honey and water that, though sweet, quickly warms you with its 5% alcohol content. You approach, and when you pick up the mug, you feel the heat together with the intense cold that escapes through the sleeves of your tunic. It is a brief but powerful truce. Remember a winter festival a few months ago when a monk distributed mead to starving villagers? The sweetness was so rare that the crowd nearly wept. This act of charity sparked a buzz about the importance of fermented beverages as nutritional support in times of scarcity. Now, with each mug, you feel your body react. The layers will become less heavy, the brazier seems to spit out more heat, and even the straw in the bed feels a little less cold. But you know that this won't last forever. When the last drop of liquid disappears, the cold will return with redoubled force. That's why you drink in short sips, saving fuel, be it beer, mead, or porridge. You move on to your night kit of hot beverages. A small bag of oats, a handful of dried herbs, thyme, lemon thyme, a little mint, and a piece of ginger, a rare imported spice that your uncle, the merchant, has obtained for a high price. You store it all in a clay pot next to the brazier, ensuring that the heat slowly releases the aromatic oils and keeps the air in the room less oppressive. It's a survival set. Finally, you pour another mug of fin porridge and carry it back to the communal bed. The huddled bodies shift slightly at your return. You take a sip, close your eyes, and let the liquid warmth spread to the tips of your toes. Each breath releases steam, and each puff keeps the shared blanket warmer for a few more minutes. You whisper to yourself, broth, porridge, and warm ale, the three keys to a medieval winter. There's no luxury, but there is ingenuity. And when the last drop is gone, you know you'll be doing it all over again in the middle of the night, because deep down, the real fight against the cold comes in sips, spoonfuls, and steaming mugs. You wake up feeling a collective weight on your body, as if you're being crushed by a living blanket. 5 people, 5 panting breaths, 5 sources of heat trying to keep you warm. Sleeping in one blanket, 5 people, is the oldest war tactic against the bitter cold. Never trust electric heat. Trust your neighbor's flesh. The darkness becomes less threatening when it's divided, and the thick cloth covering you feels like a ship about to sink from too many passengers. But hey, at least no one freezes first. You feel someone's arms slide around your waist, perhaps your little brother who snores like a pig satisfied with a feast of acorns. With each collective sigh, the blanket swells like a wave of wool. You have to adjust your body, but each movement is a living chess game. Bumping into one person's leg, knocking over another's porridge bowl, waking 3 others. Social survival here is as important as not turning into a popsicle. Historically, in cold villages in Scandinavia and the Alps, entire families, sometimes even multi-generational neighbors, would gather in a single sleeping space, sharing body heat and drastically reducing the risk of hypothermia. This practice could involve up to 10 people being crammed under a single thick wool blanket, reinforcing the notion that in medieval winters, isolation was a mortal enemy. You take a deep breath, smelling the mingled aroma of sweat, damp wool, and a hint of garlic. Someone mentioned that placing garlic cloves in the corners of the cloth helped to repel hungry rats and carried a hint of a protective ritual. On the fringes, there were those who believed that garlic not only kept rodents away, but also preserved the warm soul of each sleeper, a mix of culinary superstition and packaged magic. The bodies form a human mosaic, one head on another's foot, a shoulder that forms a bed for the next knee, a heel resting on the neighbor's cloak. You try to slide your arm into the blanket, but it gets tangled in a loose tuft of wool and bunches against your skin. The textile confusion creates reflexes. Each fold becomes an obstacle, and each fold is a little extra heat. The cruel logic of the cold. Absolute comfort does not exist, only spots of poorly distributed heat. A neighbor mumbles something in your sleep, maybe begging for more blankets, maybe complaining about the lunchbox of barley you left in the corner. You decide to pretend to be asleep, but you don't turn off your brain. Social surveillance requires that each person knows the other's breathing pattern to notice, in the dark, who is waking up. A biological alarm system with no wires, no battery, and no guarantee of performance. Historically, records show that the edges of the blanket, often reinforced with leather strips, were sewn with fixed stitches to prevent tearing during these purposeful awakenings, when someone had to go out to load firewood into the fire pit or face the creaking door. This leather reinforcement also served to hold small bags of repellent herbs, sage, lavender, eucalyptus branches, hung in the corners, creating an aromatic microclimate that was said to alleviate heat stress and the anxiety of entering the communal nest each night. You feel an elbow press into your ribs. It's the sign that someone has probably had a nightmare about wolves. Peasants, without electricity, saw shadows on the wall and believed that the distant crying was a pack of wolves on the prowl. Nightmares were chalked up as warnings from the afterlife, and some suggested switching places on the blanket to deflect the spiritual chill, a belief that scholars now debate whether was genuine or just convenient in the face of shared sleepless nights. You try to stay still, but the slip is inevitable. Your foot meets someone's face, and a slight push makes a collective groan, like an out-of-tune choir. Sorry, whispered in the dark, is a temporary peace agreement. Solidarity here is wounded and healed with each stumble in the shadows. In the center of the blanket, the heat is intense. 5 bodies generating human thermodynamics. On the perimeter, the cold still bites. The extremities, hands, feet, ear tips, are sacrificed on the altar of thermal coalition. You wrap your feet in the hem of the blanket, like a baby wrapped in a blanket. Try not to slip outside the sacred circle. Marginally curious, in some high-altitude regions, peasants would place dried nettle leaves in alternating layers inside their blankets, claiming that the mild spiciness warmed them through controlled allergic reaction. Archaeological evidence found in glacier vaults suggests that this technique was real, although its thermal effect is still the subject of experimental study. Meanwhile, a teenager pulls the blanket toward him, not too tightly, just enough to steal some of your warmth. It's a subtle power play, protecting your torso without destabilizing the entire mass of fabric. You twist your body, adjust the blanket over his arm, and whisper in a low, sarcastic voice, "Unless you want to share my hangover in the cold of dawn, give me back my warmth." The silence returns only a small sigh. Remember the academic debate about privacy versus cooperation. To what extent did blanket sharing strengthen community bonds or create daytime tensions over thermal invasion? Some historians argue that this forced intimacy created memories of collective trust, while others suggest that it fostered resentment and disputes over bed space. The night progresses, and you finally feel sleep pulling you into a state of mixed wakefulness. Half alert, half surrendered. Human warmth turns every point of contact into a guarantee of survival. But there is no darkness so total that the cold does not remind you, every now and then, that it is there, muddy, waiting for any carelessness. When the rooster crows for the first time, the cycle of waking up and remembering the cold will begin again. But for now, you close your eyes and resign peace, surrounded by bodies that are as laughable as they are vital to keeping your body temperature above freezing. You wake up with a slight shiver running down your spine, as if the cold has decided to materialize inside you. Getting sick is easy, curing it, not so much. In the Middle Ages, a simple nighttime cough could develop into full-blown pneumonia, and monastery records show that mortality from respiratory diseases doubled during the harsh winter. Your body feels like a battlefield. Your throat is scratchy, your nose is congested, and there's a hot weight in your chest that precedes the fever. Each breath is a journey through tunnels of mercury, where the cold air scrapes your membranes like primitive sandpaper. You sit up, wrapping your torso in the thickest cloak, and reach for the ointment of pork fat and pepper that the healer left beside the fireplace. You apply it with your fingers, spreading the oily mixture over your chest. The strong smell of pepper contrasts with the soot that hangs in the air, creating a tactile cloud that relieves, if only for a moment, the feeling of tightness. Meanwhile, you recall a historical fact. The winter of 1315, part of the Great Famine in Europe, aggravated outbreaks of typhus and pneumonia in peasant villages whose immune systems were already weakened by malnutrition. Your stomach churns as you remember the thin soup you ate yesterday. What little energy you had left now fed only the unwanted microbes. Fun fact, some peasants believed that wrapping the body in the skins of freshly slaughtered sheep helped to suppress the internal cold and drive away the fever. The practice was seen as almost ritualistic, a silent pact between the sick person and the animal that they believed transferred some of the vital heat to the human body. You remember wrapping yourself in a sweat-dampened skin, feeling each cold thread cut into your feverish skin. Now, the dilemma. Seek out the barber surgeon's tent or trust in home remedies. Village surgeons used leeches even for high fevers, believing that the cleansing of the blood would drive out the evil. You hesitate to expose your jugular to hungry critters. Just a touch of the leech's dull blade is enough to quicken your pulse. Academic debate still rages over the extent to which these scientific treatments based on the four humors actually aggravated or, in rare cases, alleviated symptoms in rural patients, as practical evidence is scarce and often anecdotal. As you decide, you notice your dry cough turning in a hot phlegm, a sign that your fever has risen. The fireplace seems distant. The heat doesn't penetrate your chilled skin. You grab a small bowl, fill it with warm water from the soup pot, and stir in a handful of dried mallow, recommended by ancient Greek manuscripts translated in monasteries. The steam rises in soft white clouds, and you tilt your face to inhale, feeling your mucous membranes relax for a few seconds. Each sip of the thick tea brings a tart, astringent comfort, leaving a faint residue on your tongue as a reminder that even the cure carried a hint of discomfort. You sip slowly, savoring the blend of earth, herbs, and a hint of sweet honey, the only luxury still allowed in winter. When a fever hits, the blankets feel like an iron embrace. You think about drinking a little thin mead to warm the blood, a common practice among peasants who knew that alcohol, in modest doses, worked as a vasodilator and generated a warm expansion in the veins. Still, you hesitate. The fear of losing control and falling into delirium is real. You remember the advice of a monk. Place the patient on light fast and let thirst guide the body to hydration. The rigidity of this rule borders on the cruel, but in the absence of antibiotics, each practice was studied empirically. Today, historians still question whether these religious medical guidelines slowed or helped recovery, since the lack of nutrients prolonged the fever even further. The night progresses, and even though you are exhausted, you cannot sleep. Your sweaty body twitches with incessant shivers. You want to reward every drop of sweat with an extra blanket, but the communal space is full, and the cold outside insists on escaping through every crack. Every time you move, the cough returns in rows that seem to announce the worst. You raise your torso and carefully, with thick leather gloves, turn on the small tallow lamp. The flickering light reveals your pale face, your forehead glowing with fever, your eyelids swollen. For a brief moment, the reflection makes you feel like a stranger in your own body, a body that, nevertheless, resists. You then decide to make a decision, to have the barber surgeon apply a mustard and oatmeal poultice to your chest, a practice that many considered harmful because it caused blisters, but that others swore had relieved chest pain. The choice is bitter, but you know that inaction is an even greater risk. As you wait to be strapped to the surgeon's makeshift table, you close your eyes and try to savor the residual warmth of the mallow tea. The coughing subsides for a moment, and you allow yourself a brief sigh of relief. The hope that you won't succumb to the internal cold, that you won't become another statistic in the monastery's records. And even in your feverish state, you understand, surviving winter illnesses was not just a matter of medicine, but of the courage to accept marginal pain in exchange for a chance to wake up alive. You wake up to a gray morning where the snow is melting in steady drops, creating puddles of mud that spread across the dirt floors. The harsh winter is finally retreating, but not everything ends when the cold loosens its grip. What do you do when winter wins? First, you need to clear the way. A shovel, a hoe, and ropes forgotten in the barn become your weapons against the mud and melting ice. If you don't make way for the light, the weak February sun barely reaches the inside of the hut. Historically, it is known that during the Great Famine of 1315, many European villages faced not only a shortage of firewood, but also the impossibility of working the land until the ground had completely thawed, delaying sowing and jeopardizing the next harvest. You crouch down, test the firmness of the ground with your shod foot, and realize that the soggy earth is treacherous. One false step, and you sink up to your knees. Meanwhile, you clear the wet straw and slippery planks from the barn to create a solid path. Each makeshift tractor, made of twigs and branches, helps spread the weight of your feet over the mud, a primitive drainage technique that keeps you on the ground until the ground dries out a bit. It's a labor of patience and a little glamour. Light joke number 1. Whoever said spring meant partying never try to walk in these conditions. But clearing the soil is just the beginning. You need to protect the stored grain. The granaries, still full of oats and barley, now have moisture that attracts mold. You raise the inner boards, turn the sacks over, and place extra boards between them and the floor, creating a makeshift platform for the grain to breathe. This method, extensively documented in agricultural manuals from the late 14th century, helped prevent mold and ensure viable seeds for the new season. Meanwhile, you watch your neighbors gather dry roots and branches to bolster their remaining firewood supply. Makeshift iron hooks pulled the bundles on the roof of the barn, where the wind and weak sun dry the damp logs. The repurposed wood is used not only for portable stoves, but also to build planting platforms in marshy soil. A curious aside, in the Rhone Valley, farmers raised beds with wooden slats to plant spring greens before the soil dried out completely, yielding early harvests of lettuce and radishes. As you step onto the raised bed slats, you smell the earthy scent of freshly turned earth, the scent of damp moss, and the lingering chill that still insists on scratching your throat. You sow by hand, smoothing the soil with the back of your hoe to ensure contact between the seed and the soil. Yields depend on each well-placed seed. No tractor, just sweat. And speaking of productivity, it's time to rethink our diet. Winter has left us with limited supplies, and grains have been eaten without mercy. Now, finding food involves going out into the fields to gather wild herbs, berries buried under the snow, and tree bark rich in bitter nutrients. This survival foraging was regulated by local customs. The right to cut branches in the forest was granted only after the official winter was over to prevent the plundering of logs for firewood in critical areas. You follow the edge of the forest, collecting nettle leaves, which when boiled turn into a yellowish but iron-rich puree. It's supposedly edible fungi, based on diagrams drawn on parchment by itinerant apothecaries. The marginal curiosity here is that in certain mountainous regions, gatherers used a wind basket, a sieve wicker basket attached to the hat, which made room for small wild berries to roll straight into the container, allowing the strong mountain air to carry away the unwanted foliage. When you return, you see the landowner's demarcations already drawn across the dry lands. Winter has revealed land boundaries that were once covered by snow, and border disputes arise as neighbors claim small plots for planting. This is where the academic debate comes in. Some argue that these disputes were resolved by community assemblies, villager councils, while others suggest that, with ecclesiastical authority weakened by famine, local lords imposed unilateral decisions, provoking small but recurring revolts. You sigh, adjust your tar-strengthened straw hat, and resume your walk home under the dull sun. The mud is less sticky on your shoes now, but the physical effort still requires soggy boots and almost blind determination. The cold has receded, but the urge to rebuild fences, repair damaged roofs, and gather seeds for next fall remains as relentless as the winter that is past. Finally, while the evening still holds remnants of melted snow, you and your neighbors gather to share the last bowl of winter's porridge. Between sits and sleepy laughs, you celebrate the end of cycle, but you know that in a few months you will be back on the front line against the next blizzard. It is the medieval cycle. Each spring is a collective sigh, a precarious truce before the little ice age ends. You go back inside, wandering the pen to bring more hay to the hungry animals, watching the last patches of snow dance across the lawn. And even though you're exhausted, you feel a new warmth, not just from the brazier or the layers of wool, but from the knowledge that for now, the worst is over. Has winter won? Maybe you've won a little more. You wake to the distant sound of low chants echoing through the stone corridors of the village. Even with the lingering chill biting through the cracks in the window, your first action is to pull on your thickest robe, adjust your hood, and follow the sound. Because in the Middle Ages, the warmth of faith was as vital as that of fire. Churches and monasteries were not just spiritual refuges. They were veritable communal heaters, where devotion generated collective warmth on freezing nights. You arrive at the front of the rough-hewn chapel, where flickering torches hold up the darkness outside. The air smells of myrrh and bay incense, a blend said to not only please the heavens but also neutralize the odors of damp straw and manure. Historically, Cistercian monasteries in Western Europe are known to have heated their chapter houses with iron stoves imported from German monastic workshops as early as the 12th century, creating a microclimate almost 15 degrees Celsius above the outside temperature. Imagine you, a freezing peasant, finding that not only faith, but a bath of warmth, albeit modest, provided by the collective ritual. You push open the heavy wooden door, the creak reverberating like a warning of solemnity. Inside, a group of villagers gather on rustic benches, their faces lit by the orange glow of olive oil lamps. A priest in a frayed stole leads the service, and voices rise in Gregorian chant, a hypnotic sound that seems to envelop each body in a gentle warmth, as if the sacred rhythm itself were a source of internal combustion. A sideways curiosity. In some English monasteries, monks mixed aromatic herbs with incense, believing that rosemary and thyme not only scented the room, but also stimulated the blood circulation of the faithful. You inhale deeply and feel your chest warm. As the chanting intensifies, your shoulders relax. It's as if spiritual energy is converted into heat energy. You gaze at the stone walls decorated with faded frescoes, scenes of saints warming miraculous fires, of miracles described as the divine torch that warmed a babe in a cold cradle. Historians still debate whether these accounts were literary metaphors for human warmth or descriptions of real events involving portable coals blessed by monks. You smile inwardly, imagining a priest handing out braziers of holy witchcraft. Midway through the ritual, the priest raises an amphora of holy water, slightly warm from standing near the candlelit altar. He blesses the congregation, dripping drops that crackle on your skin like tiny, cold flames. For you, each drop is a reminder of the practical role of faith to warm the body and soul. The villagers close their eyes and hold out their hands, absorbing both the divine blessing and the moist warmth that fills the air. After the hymn comes the homily. The priest speaks of the warmth of Christ's love that transmutes the ice of sins. Although you've heard longer sermons, this one feels strangely comfortable. The warm language and broad gestures bring a lightness that spreads throughout the pew. You quietly comment to a neighbor that the speech seems more like an emotional thermometer than a theological exhortation, eliciting a knowing smile. The ritual then moves on to the distribution of pieces of blessed bread and a sip of mulled wine, a ruby red breath that burns the throat. The mixture of spices in the wine, cinnamon, cloves, and a touch of ginger, is a traditional protocol on cold days, known as posset in some English monasteries. This hot broth was given to the most vulnerable people, such as the elderly and children, precisely to prevent colds and pneumonia. You are handed your pewter cup, and as you drink, you feel the warmth spread from your mouth to your stomach in a stream of liquid comfort. As the ceremony comes to a close, the community remains silent for a moment longer, enjoying the collective warmth. The torches crackle, the bodies exhale steam, and you realize that, without realizing it, you have sweated a little on the top of your tunic. It is the warmth of faith, a warmth generated by voices, incense, and unity, mixed with the sweat and human vigor present in the sacred space. You leave the chapel with your body warm and your heart at ease. Outside, the wind still howls, but now you feel like a powerless intruder against the invisible barrier you and the village have built from within. Faith, you have learned, was not just abstract beliefs. It was a thermochemical component of survival in a medieval winter. Before returning to your communal bed, you notice the faithful handing out buckets of warm water to those who need to wash their faces before returning to work. The gesture serves as a purification ritual and, in addition, ensures that the heat remains in the bodies as they return to their daily lives, a practical effect that has generated debates among monks about spiritual hygiene versus bodily hygiene. You enjoy the last splash of warmth, savor the scent of bay leaves, and imagine that, if faith didn't save lives, at least it saved fingers and nostrils from freezing. Outside, as you cross the frozen square, you notice neighbors warmed by the same ceremony, carrying torches that glow brighter after the blessing. There is something magical about this movement of steam, clothing, stone, and prayer. The combination that makes the community a great oven with walls of ice. You say goodbye to warm hearts and return to the shelter, where the fire crackles in tune with the inner flame that has just been lit. Faith, he concludes, was the most democratic warmth. It was not bought in the market, it was not measured in firewood, but was shared in songs, gestures, and sacramental sips. You wake before the sun rises, not to the warning of cold, but to the soft call of a moonlit servant knocking at the door. It is time to join the nobility in their morning ritual of how the nobles dealt with the same problem. While the common peasant dresses in makeshift layers and gathers with his family under a shared blanket, the feudal lord and his entourage have an almost ceremonial procedure for coping with the extreme cold. You head into the castle's inner courtyard and find the bathing hall, a stone room with a large cast-iron fireplace that keeps the air around it at about 20 degrees Celsius, compared to the 0 degrees Celsius outside. A servant pours hot water from a large vat over parchments of animal fat to warm the liquid before pouring it into the wooden tub. The rising heat causes the stones beneath your feet to steam, creating a plausible fairy tale mist. As the servants help the nobleman out of his velvet cloak lined with ermine fur, you notice the practical sophistication. Layers of wool beneath the velvet, several tunics layered together, and gloves lined with kid leather, a fine, soft leather that not only insulates against the cold, but also makes it easier to handle utensils made slippery by the dampness of everyday life. You wonder how much such a set would cost a peasant, perhaps the equivalent of a year's worth of crops. The bath itself involves the gentleman kneeling on a wooden bench while servant pours buckets of hot water over his back, filling the tub just enough to cover his knees. The water, enriched with rosemary and lavender, herbs brought from distant regions by merchants, releases a sophisticated aroma that, for the nobleman, is equivalent to escaping from the coarse turnip soups of the people. While he bathes, the servants take the opportunity to clean the polished iron mirror and adjust the temperature of the fire without interrupting the flow of heat. After the bath, the ritual moves on to the dressing room, where fabrics and furs await, arranged in order of thickness. A servant holds the silk tunic covered in embroidery and endless gold embroidery, while another puts on velvet trousers, rabbit fur overcoats, and deerskin boots with sheepskin linings. Each garment is adjusted by expert hands who know exactly how to anticipate the expansion and contraction caused by the sudden change in body temperature, a skill passed down through generations of servants. You watch as the nobleman adjusts the high fox fur collar that encircles his neck, leaving just a small gap for fresh air, a textile tap, if you will. The velvet hood over it protects not only from the wind, but from the whining of courtiers complaining of scratches on their skin. The result is an elegant silhouette that, even when dressed in cold weather, maintains an upright posture and an aura of power. Meanwhile, a bowl of dried peaches soaked in wine seasoned with cloves is offered to the lord, who eats the fruit delicately, avoiding splashing the hot liquid on his impeccable tunic. This morning snack, a luxury imported from Alentejo Gardens, provides refined sugars to kickstart the metabolism, something that the peasant only experiences by chance, on feast days or ecclesiastical charity. The nobleman then heads to the inner terrace, where marble benches heated by a rudimentary smoke channeling system provide a warm throne. There, he watches the fog lift over the village while receiving reports from messengers covering the harvest and firewood fronts. Even in the cold, administration is his top priority, and he jots down notes on parchment sealed with hot wax. The heat keeps the ink fluid. You realize that, despite the pomp, there is technique and pragmatism embedded in every gesture. From the partial bath that conserves water and firewood resources, to the use of herbs to scent the air and ward off miasmas. From the arrangement of clothing to optimize blood circulation to the solarium of heated benches to avoid thermal shock that could cause muscle stiffness. It is luxury transformed into survival science. As the day progresses, the nobleman and his entourage leave the castle, wearing long, lined cloaks and hoods adorned with feathers to prevent the snow from settling. The horses, in turn, wear thick wool coats that keep the animal's body warm, allowing the entourage to move more quickly along the muddy paths. You, standing next to them in civilian clothes, feel the contrast between the regulated heat of the castle and the cold outside. But you do not envy. Although privilege is powerful, The communion with the land and the hardship of the cold give peasant life an authenticity immune to courtly rigidity. Yet to us, there is admiration for the ingenuity that converts luxury into function, demonstrating that, at the end of the day, nobles and peasants share the same enemy, the deadly cold, and each, in their own way, devise solutions to resist the coldest nights. You wake to the distant drone of drums and the echo of inaudible orders as if coming from underground. It is not only the cold against you, but the winter siege. The enemy is not only frost, but white spears that surround your home. Sleeping during the winter siege requires almost superhuman stoicism, as the village, now converted into a makeshift fortress, disputes with the invading forces the right to exist under the snow. As soon as you step out of the straw bed, you spot the frozen moat that once provided protection, now a treacherous obstacle. A worn drawbridge creaks in protest whenever anyone lowers it to enter or leave. Within the walls of wood and clay, watchtowers burn torches like stubborn beacons. You join a group of defenders armed with bows and maces, gloved in fur, though their frozen fingers can barely pull the rope. The cold is merciless. Every breath turns crystals in your beard and mustache, and the wind cuts like fin blades. You wonder how many nights there are left before your supplies run out. Historically, winter sieges, such as the Siege of Orleans in 1428, have shown that a lack of firewood and food within the walls can bring down even the most determined garrison. And you know that your collective resilience will be tested to the limit. Soon, curfew arrives. Lights are dimmed, doors are locked, and lookouts take up rigid positions on the ramparts. Luckily, the siege is not total. There's a small gap in the snowy forest that allows for nighttime patrols in search of firewood or forgotten supplies. You volunteer, wrapping yourself in layers of wool and fur, carrying a rope sack and a curved blade dagger, ideal for cutting through frozen twigs. The silence outside is deathly, interrupted only by the crunch of snow beneath your boots. You move stealthily, but each exhalation reveals your position. At a predetermined point, you find an old oak tree, its trunk twisted, its branches still resisting the weight of the snow. With your dagger, you cut twigs and smaller branches, supply that will keep several families warm when you take them back. Those who live under siege know that every breath counts and every log is worth more than a coin. On the way back, you come across an enemy patrol guarding the breach. Your heart races. Silence, motionless bodies, cloaks aligned with the white landscape. They pass by, without noticing your silhouette. You return to the interior of the walls, where firewood is rationed on the communal pyres. Each family receives fragments calculated to keep a small brazier going for just a few hours. There is then debate about whether a common central fire or individual stoves is better, a decision that, according to chronicles of a siege of Capri in 1528, can divide the morale of the garrison. As you pile the kindling gathered in a corner of the communal fireplace, you watch the pale faces and hunched shoulders of your fellow villagers. No one speaks of defeat. Hope is an invisible fire burning in their eyes. Children, wrapped in cloaks, learn the ritual of burying their hands in the embers and pulling them out without screaming. A training in endurance that, in addition to being courageous, serves as a test of courage for future defenders. Food, however, is the real internal siege. Thin porridge is already becoming a legend, and barley remains only in loose grains. Collective soups are given minimal proportions and, until a few months ago, were so thick that they could sustain a man for a whole day. Now, each hot ladle is divine forgiveness, but also tension, because whoever eats an extra quarter at night leaves fewer calories for those who wake up at dawn watch. In the dark room, the vibration of chains and the creaking of doors signal that it is time for another shift of vigil. You exchange the blanket for the bough and take a position on a wooden ledge under the starry sky, feeling the cold blade touch your jugular. Every nearby shadow is a cause for alarm. Every noise, a potential surprise attack. The siege does not stop at the wall, but invades every thought and dream. Dawn brings a sudden gust of wind that whirls the snow. The torches flicker, and the stars seem distant. You gather more wood to keep the coals burning, a ritual of life and death. As you pile kindling on the brazier, you reflect. A winter siege is a test of ingenuity and solidarity, where every spark of heat, every grain of barley, and every watchman's attempt forms the invisible wall that can save a village. As dawn breaks, the bell in the tower rings, summoning everyone to count bodies and supplies. Some comrades do not return from their shift. The snow keeps their bodies hidden. It is a loss that cuts deeper into your chest than any icy flash. Still, you take a deep breath. Spring, though far away, still holds promise. And as the timid sun touches the treetops, you understand. Sleeping under winter siege is not a ceasefire against the cold, but constant combat. A vigil where the adversary is made of ice, hunger, and fear, defeated only by collective courage and by each improvised fire that insists on burning in the darkness. You wake to a pale glow coming through the crack in the door that covers the straw stubble. Winter is finally waning and spring is peeking in. The end of the season, the beginning of peaceful sleep. Today, the song of birds replaces the lament of the icy wind, and the promise of mild days seeps through the cracks of your heart. You sit up slowly, feeling your muscles still tense from long nights spent watching, and watch as the diffuse light coats the clay walls with a yellowish, almost warm hue. Still wrapped in your heavy cloak, you reach out and touch the pile of straw that served as your bed. It is drier, less damp from the frost, and exudes the soft aroma of grain. Historically, it is known that after winter, farmers used to replace the old straw with new hay gathered in the first meadows in April, reinforcing the bed to improve insulation and ward off pests that accumulate in the old material. You get up, shake off the residual hay, and spread the dark autumn straw outside, preparing the space for a new beginning. You wear fewer layers, a thin woolen tunic, a quilted vest, and a light linen blanket. The air no longer bites against your skin. Every movement brings a slight chill of freshness, but no longer the bite of extreme cold. You hang your well-washed straw bag outside to air out, preventing the mildew that sets in when the weather clears. A side note, in some parts of northern England, peasants would leave straw bags out in the moonlight for 3 nights in a row, believing that the lunar dew purified the material, reducing the presence of mites and fungi, an empirical method of decontamination that some researchers now compare to modern air dry. You walk over to the communal fire pit and notice that the wood is dry, clean, and less consumed. The old embers have been used down to the last spark, and now the new firewood awaits adjustment in quantity. Fewer sturdy logs, more thin branches to keep the fire smoldering through the night without the fierce winter flames. It's a chance to sleep with a gentler fire pit, saving firewood and providing constant heat, a strategy recorded in Dorset Chronicles, where rotating logs on smaller fire pits kept homes warm without depleting supplies. You spread the communal blanket around the fire and adjust the straw bed a few feet away, creating a warmth ring that envelopes your body without requiring excessive layers. Academic debate rages on. Some argue that the loosening of layers and the use of lower heat fires indicate a conscious adaptation to the spring climate, while others suggest that such changes simply resulted from the scarcity of firewood after months of intensive consumption, forcing drastic adjustments in the preparation for rest. You choose to believe that it's a bit of both, economy and emerging comfort. As night approaches, the chirping of crickets replaces the howling of the wind. You notice the first green grasses poking through the cracks on the earthen floor. Shoots of nettle, sage, and clover promise richer soups, menus that will soon include tender leaves instead of dry roots. The night air is cool, but never cold, a natural coolant that soothes the fever in a weary body. You lie down on the renovated straw pile, now scented with dried hay and a few mint leaves hanging from the ceiling to repel insects and provide a gentle scent. This green repellent comes from ancient Gallic customs and was adopted by farmers as an alternative to the heavy winter scent, combining practicality and well-being. Each mint leaf provides a feeling of freshness and scares away nocturnal mosquitoes that reappear in the heat. The sound is different now. Frogs croaking in the nearby marshes, owls calling low, and in the distance, the call of a shepherd leading his flock back to shelter. The entire village seems to breathe a sigh of relief. as if releasing the tension that has built up over months. You feel your body relax. The weight of the layers disappears, and the collective sigh is no longer a squeeze, but a soft, airy embrace. You recall the split sleep pattern that prevailed in winter, the first and second sleeps, and smile at the realization that with shorter, less cold nights, sleep may be consolidated into a single stage. Research in peasant diaries records this phenomenon. The transition to continuous sleep occurred with the shift to unified first-hour sleep schedules, allowing for 6 to 8 hours of uninterrupted rest from April to September. Your body feels heavy with accumulated fatigue, ready for a full night without wakefulness. As you close your eyes, your last thoughts float to the coming harvest, the crops that will sprout and the renewed life that blooms even after the cruelest winter. The straw welcomes you like a friendly nest. The brazier emanates moderate heat, and the aroma of herbs lingers in the air. The light clothes fit like a second skin, without friction, without excessive weight. You take a deep breath, surrendering yourself to the peaceful sleep you haven't felt in a long time. And for a brief moment, you forget the biting cold, the exhausting vigils, and the relentless siege. On the threshold of sleep, you understand. The end of the season brings the beginning of peaceful sleep. Now the moon sets silently over the reviving fields, and the crowing of the roosters is still distant enough not to interrupt your rest. You are immersed in a deep sleep, not the fragmented sleep of winter nights, but a gentle continuity, where each sigh merges into the next without the constant surveillance of the cold. The world seems to bend to the rhythm of spring, where the night air no longer punishes, but lulls. Every detail of your shelter reflects lessons learned. The dry, fragrant new straw, the ring of glowing embers that hold in the heat, the lightweight layers that insulate without trapping, the fresh herbs that ward off insects and sweeten the air. It's a choreography of survival honed over generations. Small ingenuities that, together, have enabled you to make it through the winter and embrace the next season with confidence. You sleep beneath the same earth that once froze but now warms with the promise of harvests, renewed work, and celebrations in the sun. The entire village rests thus, united not by fear but by hope, sharing the renewed warmth of body and spirit. Each deep breath anticipates days of sunshine, of laughter, of outdoor endeavors without the constant shadow of the deadly cold. And when the morning sun finally invades your shelter, you will wake up with your chest free, your mind awake, and your heart light. Because, in the Middle Ages, sleeping well was a triumph. Silent, an act of resistance that began with firewood, straw, and ingenuity, but was embodied in the renewal of sleep. Simple, continuous, and truly peaceful. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.